virtual AAS meeting. I have high confidence that everything will run smoothly. So this is session 107, Extrasolar Planets 1, Direct Imaging and Radial Velocities. So let's just, and by the way, my name is Hannah Jane Condell from the University of Wyoming, and I will be chairing this session. We have 7 talks in this session, one of which is a dissertation talk, and we do have a gap in our schedule between 12 and 12:10, so just be aware of that. So our first speaker this morning is Sylvestre Lecour of the Paris Observatory. And he will be talking about atmospheric characterization of exoplanets with optical interferometry.
Okay, so thank you for having me giving this talk here. So 5 minutes is short, so I will go straight to the subject. So we are a loose team of engineers, scientists and engineers working on optical interferometry. And we, under the name exogravity, we try to observe exoplanets with the gravity instrument. So the gravity instrument is an interferometer which combines the light from the 4 UT, the 4 telescope at Paranal, the 8 meters, and the beam from the 4 8-meter telescope is going through a building, and in the basement there's the gravity beam combiner. So it doesn't look like much, but to the left you have the 4 beams coming from the telescope and entering the cryostat that you see here. So on the acquisition camera, what you have when you observe are the 4 images, so that's the 4 columns corresponding to image coming from the 4 telescope. And the lowest, the bottom line here, that's the field of view of the telescope. And what we observe here is just a star, so you see 4 times the same star. So what the particularity of gravity is that it consists into 2 interferometers. So there's 2 combiner. So the field is split into 2 parts. So one is observing the star, so to the right of the green light. So the star is used for fringe tracking to correct for the atmosphere. And the second part of the light on the left of this green light is sent to the science spectrometer, which includes the interferometer. And the interferometer is making fringes. So you have this 4 field of view that you see on the right, and then you have the fringes, which are the interference of the light coming from the exoplanet. So here it's a brown dwarf, but an exoplanet will be the same, just fainter. And the exoplanet will create fringes. So interference fringes that will be mixed with fringes coming from the stellar flux, the scattered light coming from the star, which is much brighter. But with the interferometer, you have these 2 sets of fringes which are slightly offsetted, one with respect to the other. And that's how optical interferometry leverage on the baseline, the 100 baseline, the distance between the telescope, to precisely pinpoint where is the exoplanet and to distinguish the flux from the exoplanet to the flux coming from the star. So what's the benefits of that? So if you look at imaging, classical imaging is limited to the bright young exoplanets that are far away from the star. With optical interferometry, we can look closer to the star with separation of the order of 100 milliarc. That's the blue zone, which is the new space that's observable with optical interferometry. The second thing is that with this interferometer, we have very precise astrometry on the position of the planet. By looking at this set of fringes, we can precisely measure the distance between the two and the separation on sky. And before that, with imaging, you could have 1 milliarc second, typically 1 milliarc second astrometry. And to get the precise orbital motion, you will need additional constraints like the coplanarity and things like that. With gravity, we are another 50 or 100 in terms of accuracy on the astrometry. So now we can pinpoint the position of the exoplanets within 10 or 20, 30, 50 microarc seconds.
1 minute left.
So it means that you can have a precise measurement of all the orbital parameters of the planets. And we've tested that on 51 Eris-b. And even though the period is very long, with only a 2-year span with this instrument, you can pinpoint the eccentricity within 10%. The other thing is because you can distinguish precisely the light from the star, from the light to the exoplanet, you can have very good spectra. And the K-band spectra that we extracted with gravity lately on beta Pictoris b here are the white points to be compared with the classical GPI imaging in blue. And you see the molecular absorption feature there. And from this molecular absorption feature, you can go one step further and try to characterize the atomic ratio, for example, in the atmosphere of exoplanets. And here, for example, we observe beta Pictoris b, and we characterize the C2O ratio within 10%, which is the first in the domain. And we are doing that for all the planets of HR 799, and we do that for 51 Eris-b works on green. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, do we have any questions from the audience? If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. All participants in this session, all attendees should be able to open up the Q&A feature and be able to submit questions there. Okay, we have a question from Ian Crossfield. Can gravity be used to discover new planets or mainly to characterize planets already identified by other instruments?
So you can discover new planets. For example, this one here, it's an actually observation that is not published, so I cannot give you the name. But you can find new planets which were not observed by imaging. Yes.
All right, a question from David Chiardi. What is the practical stellar brightness limit for gravity?
Brightness limit of the planet or of the star? On the star, you can go up to K magnitude of 10, 11.
He wanted both.
Exoplanets, so we observe 51 Eris, which is 19 in K-band.
A question from Jocelyn McMahon. Does the type, size, or mass of the star affect how well this method of detection works?
No, it's only a matter of contrast ratio and distance between the planet and the star. Then if you do astrometry, then yes, the mass of the star imports, but not here.
All right. Well, thank you, Sylvestre. Let's transition to the next talk. So if you could stop sharing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your talk. Get the next speaker. Oh no. Okay. All right. Our next speaker is Thane Curry from NASA Ames and Subaru. And he'll be talking about Skexeo Cheris imaging of a candidate protoplanet / planet-induced structure around a young star. All right.
All right, thank you very much for coming to my talk. Today I'll be speaking about a candidate planet formation related thing identified around a young star with Skexeo. I previewed some of this work in disguise last October at the Leo conference. Today I'll be giving you a fuller picture of what we think we've found. So, okay, good. So the motivation for our work is trying to image or understand planet formation. We know that nearly all stars are born with gas and dust-rich protoplanetary disks, which form the building blocks of planet formation, and at least most stars appear to have formed planets around them at many tens of millions of years. A subset of these fully formed planetary systems include wide separation super-Jovian mass planets, the kind we've been able to directly image. If we want to understand how these extremes of planet formation occur, we want to be able to study protoplanetary disks in the process of converting raw material into planets. And so these would be so-called transitional disks. So the telltale indirect signatures of transitional disks around nearby stars include clear cavities where small dust is evacuated, presumably due to a massive companion forming a ring-like structure or a cavity, and then spiral arms where, which may be due to the influence of a massive companion. In a few cases, we can actually directly image protoplanets in these systems. So the topic of this work is AB Auriga. This is a well-known Taurus Auriga star-forming region member, around 2 to 3 million years old. On hundreds of AUs down to a few tens of AU scales, we see spiral arms, many of them. And in the submillimeter, we see evidence for a cleared cavity. So presumably evacuated of pebble-sized dust, interior to about an arcsecond, or about 160 AU. We targeted AB Auriga with Skexio. We have a total of 11 data sets taken over 3 years, sensitive to planets in exterior to about 0.1 arcseconds, or about 15 AU. We processed the data using a variety of methods, including angular differential imaging and reference star differential imaging, and using different PSF subtraction methods. So this is what we found. Now, we were able to recover previously seen spirals now in smaller separations, so you can faintly see these in this image stretch. We also identify a new spiral for the first time in total intensity data. So this is to the east, as you can see there. We also see this thing. This is a concentrated clump of emission almost due south of the star. If we compare the position of this thing to the almost submillimeter ring, we see it lies within the ring, just interior to it, exactly where we would expect a massive companion to be if it were actually sculpting this ring. So the evidence that this might have something to do with planet formation is increased if we look at the CO gas data for ALMA. So this was studied a few years ago. There are 2 spirals seen in CO gas, and the triangles identify the positions where we think this a hidden planet might be causing the spirals. The magenta spiral in particular is the predicted position of a massive companion responsible for the western or right side spiral. It is almost identical to the position of the bright concentration clump that we see. Now, just for clarification, we see this feature regardless of how we process the data over 11 different data sets taken with multiple instruments. This is not a processing artifact. If we analyze the photometry or spectra of this object, we see that it's roughly flat in F-nu space. And if we compare it to the spectrum of the scaled down version of the star, which is shown in magenta, is either consistent with that or even slightly bluer than the star. Now remember here, the star is actually not a bare stellar photosphere. It's actually mostly reprocessed near-infrared emission dominated by 1000 AU Kelvin dust emission. Now if we combine all the epochs of data together, we can easily rule out a background object. So this is not a background galaxy. And in fact, it's most consistent with counterclockwise orbital motion than a stationary source. The chronic issue with trying to identify true protoplanets embedded in transitional disks is whether or not we're just seeing a disk feature. On one hand, the source appears to be spatially extended. On the other hand, it is hard to argue that this is easily a piece of the disk. So we have polarized intensity data for the disk at the same wavelengths where we got our total intensity data. If we forward model that image through our data, it matches almost exactly what we see in our data set, except for this bright emission clump. So we think this is a different emission source, possibly related to planet formation. The broader significance of this work, though, is that this may identify a different or atypical mode of how massive planets form. The canonical picture is that we have a 5 Earth mass core, undergoes runaway gas accretion, and then is able to create a gaseous envelope.
Time to wrap up.
This core accretion scenario, this works well on tens of AU scales. The alternate version is disk instability, which is a very violent process, including many spiral arms. This works best at 100 AU scale. So perhaps we're seeing a different mode of planet formation. That's my talk.
Great, thanks, Thane. Any questions? All right, we have a question from Dave Chiardi. Hi, Thane, nice talk. Can you comment more specifically on how we distinguish between disk clumps and planetary bodies, particularly in light of the recent Fomalhaut B results? All the same arguments were made for Fomalhaut B as well. Again, thank you for the talk.
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna step a bit into the hornet's nest a little bit. On the Fomalhaut B result, I don't have much to say about the STIS data because I haven't processed it. I get different results for the ACS data than Gaspar and Riki get. In this particular case, it's different because these are, we're not dealing with an expanding clump or a collision, possibly with Fomalhaut, as we did with Fomalhaut B, but whether we're seeing a static disk feature or not. So the ways that we would be able to distinguish between a static disk feature and a true, something that has to do with a planet, are one with orbital motion. So if we see this object, see this feature move, it's a lot harder to argue this is a static feature. In the second case is if we do not see it in polarized intensity data. So we do not see this feature in polarized intensity. I can talk more about that with you later.
Okay, so I have a question. So the EPRV is a gas-rich disk and is presumably optically thick. So even if there were some sort of accreting planet in there, would you actually be able to see the emission from that, given that the disk is so optically thick?
Well, sure. I think overall the disk is optically thick. The region where we're seeing the disk is within the millimeter gap. As I don't think we're actually seeing light from a protoplanet itself because this is spatially resolved. In some disk instability models, the actual clump right before it collapses into a planet can be AUs of scale size and starts to become comparable to the scale that we see. But we're probably actually seeing emission that's being reprocessed by an unseen planet through the disk. The other alternative is that we're actually seeing a piece of the disk that is being directly heated by an unseen planet, and so the scale height is being puffed up, and that is why it appears particularly bright in total intensity.
Okay, thanks. A question from Ben Jenkins. Is it common to see multiple disk clumps in planetary disk imagery, or is one singular mass clump a more prominent result in your observations? Great talk, thanks.
Yeah. I think I've processed many high contrast imaging data sets for protoplanetary disks. This is the first time I've seen a feature like this in a disk. The closest analogy to this is HD 100546b, but that probably has a point source embedded in it, and it is more easily detected in the thermal infrared than in the near infrared. We'll be able to compare the near infrared to thermal infrared results in our paper.
Great, thanks, Thane. All right, let's move on to our next talk. Next up, we have Emily Rickman of the University of Geneva. So this is a 20-minute dissertation talk. So you will have 15 minutes for your talk, plus 3 minutes for questions and 2 minutes for transition. So I'll give you a warning after you're 10 minutes into your talk, and then one when you're 14 minutes into your talk. Okay?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Emily Rickman. I'm just finishing up my PhD at the University of Geneva, and in fall I'll be moving to a Space Telescope with an ESA fellowship. I would just like to highlight my supervisor who I've been working with for the past 4 years, Dr. Damien Segerson. So I've been working on the direct imaging and spectral characterization of long period exoplanets and brown dwarfs. So some of the motivations for this have already been discussed, and my thing is not working for some reason. Oh no. Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me do. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna have to stop this for a second. Okay, sorry, technical difficulties. Hopefully this works.
No
Okay,
worries.
brilliant. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so yeah, some of the main motivations for this are we need to actually understand the occurrence rate of such long period planets and brown dwarfs, which is something that to date has not been investigated so much just through the availability of being able to either directly image or discover through long period radial velocities of these kind of candidates. And the reasoning for this is that we can say something about how such giant planets and brown dwarfs form at these kind of separations and orbital periods. So we need to be able to actually detect these things to say something about that. Furthermore, if we are able to detect, for example, brown dwarfs with dynamical masses, model independent masses, then we can start to constrain the mass luminosity age relation of such objects. And if we look at their atmospheric and spectral properties, then we can start to test atmospheric models of giant gaseous planets and brown dwarfs. So the two techniques I've been using to kind of do this are, first of all, on the radial velocity side, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So if you have a star and a substellar companion orbiting one another around the center of mass, then we measure the spectral line over time, and we can obtain the orbital period of that companion, as well as the minimum mass with an unknown orbital inclination. But if we combine this with direct imaging, so again, I'm sure you're all familiar, but we directly look at a star with a planet or a brown dwarf orbiting it, and we have to take into account in ground-based observations for the Earth's atmosphere, for example, which we can do using extreme adaptive optics and a chronograph to suppress as much of the starlight as possible. But if we combine direct imaging with radial velocities, then we actually remove the degeneracy of the unknown orbital inclination, and therefore we can get its true dynamical mass of the substellar companion that we're observing. And if we look at the mass separation space of such observations and then kind of highlight these two kind of main population areas that I'm interested in from both the radial velocity and the imaging side, then what we're starting to do is really bridge the gap between these two different detection methods. So as we go to larger and larger telescopes with better instrumentation and better post-processing techniques of imaging data, then we're able to image things with a lower and lower mass and at a closer inner working angle. And as we increase the number of time that the amount of time we've been observing candidates using radial velocity data, then we go out to longer and longer orbital periods. And so at some point, the separation mass space overlaps for these two detection methods. And so during my PhD, I've been working on these two techniques. First of all, on the radial velocity side, I've been making use of the Coralie survey, which I'm going to talk a bit about. And then on the direct imaging side, I've been making use of SPHERE on the VLT. So the Coralie survey is an ongoing radial velocity survey based at the University of Geneva for more than 20 years now. It contains more than 1,600 main sequence G and K dwarfs primarily. It's a volume limited sample of solar type stars. And I have been the coordinator for the past few years of analyzing the long-term drifts hosting potential companion candidates. So we're talking things with orbital periods of more than 10 or 20 years. And so from this last year, I published a handful of these long period companion candidates of planets and low mass brown dwarfs. And these are just a handful that I will present. But this, for example, we have a planet here with a more than 20-year period, 8.5 Jupiter masses. Another at 16.5 orbital period, a 6.5-year orbital period, at 4.5 Jupiter masses. Another supereccentric planet at 16.5-year orbital period, just under 7 Jupiter masses, and a multi-planet system with a previously known inner planet of 1.5 Jupiter masses on a 7-year period, but also with a 3 Jupiter mass companion on a 24-year orbital period, and another multi-planetary system with 2 companions, one already previously known, of a similar mass, both about 3.5 Jupiter masses, with one at a 1-year orbital period and one at a 32-year orbital period. And so these planets contribute to just a small known set of such long period exoplanets. So it's really important to be able to probe this mass separation parameter space in order to really understand what the occurrence rate of such objects are. And then if I take you back to the mass separation diagram I was showing you before, then all of the planets and brown dwarfs that we published in this paper all sit within this kind of bridge space between radial velocity detected planets and directly imaged planets. And so it's these kind of candidates that we're looking for in order to be able to get their dynamical masses. And so as part of the coordination of the survey, I've been assessing the detectability of such objects. So this is a 5 sigma contrast map where I've stacked several contrast curves from measured sphere performance over the past few years. And then I've just overplotted the expected contrast based on the minimum mass from the radial velocities with the separations and just the detectability. So some of these objects we know are definitely going to be detectable. So they're either maybe high mass brown dwarfs, maybe even low mass stars, and then some of them are on the lower end of the scale to see if we can actually detect either some giant planets or low mass brown dwarfs. And so I've been putting the effort forward at the University of Geneva to carry out these observations using SPHERE on the VLT based at Paranal Observatory in Chile. And so with SPHERE, the really nice capability is that you can simultaneously image using ERDIS, which is the infrared dual band imaging spectrograph, as well as using the IFS. And the really nice thing about this is that with ERDIS, you can do narrowband photometry. I've primarily been doing this using the JH and K band. So if we get a detection, it's nice to be able to do that, but simultaneously we get the spectral information and the IFS part of the instrument. So doing this simultaneously allows for us to not only detect such companions, but to also characterize them when we do get such detections. And so one of the promising companion candidates from the previous paper that I mentioned is HD 13724. And so this one had a minimum mass of 27 Jupiter masses, so we knew it was at least a low mass brown dwarf. And again, this is 20 years worth of radial velocity data, and we have really nice orbital coverage. And so we took some imaging data of this, and we gained a really nice direct detection in August 2018 that we can see there on the left image, and this was an H-band. So this is spectral differential imaging produced using the graphic pipeline in Geneva. And then we took some follow-up data in the J-band, and we also took some K-band data, and as well as the IFS data, and just over a year later, and we can already see that the companion has moved a significant amount. So this allowed us to really constrain the dynamical mass of this object really well, using the minimum mass from the radial velocity along with the astrometric data from the imaging. And from this, we obtain a dynamical model-independent mass of about 50 Jupiter masses. So if we look at the spectral data for this object, then what we obtain is we have these narrow gray bands that I've highlighted, and those correspond to the ERDIS data in the J, H, and K bands respectively. And then we also have the IFS spectral coverage on the left that I've highlighted. And so this really enables us to have a look at the spectral type across a wide wavelength range in order to characterize the object. And as we can see, we've got some nice spectral features from both methane and water primarily. And so we did a fit of this compared to observed brown dwarfs, field brown dwarfs, and models. And what we obtain is the spectral type of a T4 with a temperature of about 1000 Kelvin. And this seems to agree pretty well. And so this just became one of only 4 such objects, 4 T-type brown dwarfs with both radial velocity and imaging data. And so this is really a crucial benchmark object to be able to test atmospheric models of brown dwarfs, which ultimately act as analogues for giant planets. And so I've been kind of continuing this and carrying this out, and just spend a minute or two just presenting some new ones. So then we have that I'm currently preparing to publish in the near future. So we had another direct detection from a radial velocity detected companion, which had a much lower minimum mass, but when we image it, then we get this really nice detection of a low mass star at about 260 Jupiter masses. So this again will be really important in placing on the mass luminosity age relation that I was discussing before. And we don't have so many of these objects, but we really have a model independent mass. So these kind of build up this bigger picture. We have another such object, again from the Coralie survey, it's sphere data of a similar mass at 280 Jupiter masses. And another such one that is pretty interesting because it really sits on the boundary between this kind of low mass star, high mass brown dwarf regime, and I'm investigating more into this now, of about 83 Jupiter masses. So my plan is to kind of analyze the spectral information of this. And so stay tuned for those to be published. And so I'm just going to wrap up and just to say, so this has been a big observational effort during my PhD in order to detect such objects using radial velocity and direct imaging data. And from this, I've been able to obtain some important benchmark objects, and these can be used to test atmospheric formation and evolutionary models of ultra-cool substellar companions. And ultimately, these can serve as analogues for giant gaseous exoplanets. And these detections join just a short list of brown dwarf companions or even giant planet companions with a known dynamical mass. And like I say, these contribute to understanding the mass luminosity age relation of brown dwarfs. And so going forward, when I move to a space telescope, I plan to kind of continue this line of work, but I also want to combine astrometric data from Gaia and Hipparchus, looking at proper motion anomalies, and then going to use this information to kind of continue this imaging survey that I've been working on to find such companions and help build up this bigger picture of the occurrence rate, and therefore say something about their formation mechanisms and testing atmospheric models as well. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Emily. We have plenty of time for questions. Any questions from the audience? So if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A feature. Should be in one of the little icons at the bottom of your screen. So I'll kick things off. So presumably, since you get these dynamical masses and you get luminosities, you can start constraining some of the models for very low mass stars or brown dwarfs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just about building up a bigger picture of these things, of these objects, to kind of say something about these statistics of such objects. So yeah, by getting a known mass where you're model independent and you have the luminosity and you get the key as well is you get the age from that we can obtain from the star, whereas you can't do this so easily with field brown dwarfs, for example. So yeah.
Great, thanks. We have a couple questions from Ian Crossfield. The first is, will there be efforts to follow up your RV detected companions with gravity, which we heard about earlier in the session?
Yeah, so this is something that we have actually, Sylvester and I have already discussed at some point, but yeah, absolutely. I think it would be really, to get that precision on the astrometry would also be really beneficial in constraining the dynamical mass more so, as Sylvester was saying before, and to obtain even better spectral information as well from gravity, definitely.
Yeah, sorry, the other question from Ian was basically, what about other medium to high resolution spectrographs?
Yeah, I mean, so kind of going forward, I would like to kind of span outside of just looking at Corelli data and sphere data, and that's my kind of plan to go forward and to have a look at some other instruments as well.
Question from David Chiardi. Thank you, Emily. Nice work and talk. Can you talk more about the biases towards higher mass objects for those objects that are imaged, because imaging is in general easier for face-on systems, and how that affects connecting these results to lower mass objects?
Yeah, so I guess it's difficult to try and tie these kind of populations together, because we are going to become kind of mass limited at some point, or contrast limited rather. But I think it's important that by combining these detection techniques that we're able to really start bridging these gaps. So kind of more so from, and if we think about the full mass separation parameter space between transits and radial velocities and imaging, then we kind of span across that mass range. And so especially when you get these kind of multi-planet systems as well that I showed, where you have maybe a close-in planet that's quite not so high mass, and we would never expect to be able to image that, or definitely not with like current instrumentation or anything, and then make a comparison in that system with the higher mass objects at wider separations, and how those systems kind of formed and ended up as they are today.
Question from Daniela Bardelez Galufi. Hi, Emily, really interesting talk. I was wondering if you could comment on what is the most likely formation mechanism for these long period substellar objects.
Yeah, so I guess there's the two main competing theories. So either the co-accretion theory, where you build up the planet by coagulation, or the kind of gravitational instability, where you kind of clump down at wide separations. And so what I would like to test going forward is looking at really, really young systems where you can decipher between these two different formation scenarios, kind of the cold start versus hot start scenarios, by looking at their like magnitudes at those timescales. And so it's difficult to do it for some of these systems from the Corelli survey, because they're typically a bit older and it's kind of difficult to differentiate. But it would be interesting to look at younger objects and test these formation scenarios. So it would be difficult for me to say which one of those theories is better for these, particularly for these objects that have been observed. But going forward, that's something I would like to test.
One last question from Kevin Healy. What range of surface temperatures did you find for the other sphere spectral detections?
So this is kind of ongoing work. So I don't have an answer to that at the moment.
One last minute question. Great talk. Is there a lower limit to the mass of the companions for detection using these methods? Also, will there be a possibility to detect longer period exoplanets with either of these methods? Thanks again and great talk.
So in the lower mass range, like definitely sort of around the 10 Jupiter mass regime using sphere. So we're starting to probe that kind of giant planet mass range, but it's something that's still extremely difficult to do and hasn't been done yet. But in theory, we do have the performance with sphere to be able to do that.
Great. Thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, we have Jerry Hubble from the Mark Slade Remote Observatory. We'll be talking about high precision photometry, defocus method versus diffuser method. This is a 5-minute talk. So we see your slides, Jerry, and I believe you're still muted. I think you want to present the slides. We're able to see your PowerPoint, so you want to go to present.
Yes, I
here.
just figured out how to unmute. For some
Oh, there you
reason, I
go.
forgot to unmute, and so I'm sorry. So yes,
There we go.
so
Good.
my name is Jerry Hubble. I'm with the Mark Slade Remote Observatory. Just a little bit about me. I'm in the amateur division of the AAS. So I was really happy to be invited to give a talk here. It's really pretty cool. I'm Vice President of Engineering for Explore Scientific, and also we formed a nonprofit called the MSR Science to share our results at our observatory. I also published 2 books by Springer. You can see there on the screen. So what I'm going to be talking about is based on a paper that I discovered in October 2017 called Towards Space-like Photometric Precision from the Ground with Beam Shaping Diffusers, published in October of 17. And presented a very interesting device called a diffuser, engineered diffuser. And so I read that paper and was pretty cool to find that you could do very high precision photometry, and I wanted to see if it would apply to small telescope systems. So I started this work in 2018 for about a year and bought the commercially available diffuser from RPC Photonics, and we published our paper last year from the Society for Astronomical Sciences at their proceedings last year. This is what the Mark Slade Remote Observatory looks like. It's a small 6.5 inch apo refractor mounted with a 6-inch dome, 6-foot dome that is remotely accessed over the internet. We do all our observations over the internet with tight DNC. So the main difference between the diffused image and the defocused image is in the point spread function of the star shape when you image it with the diffuser compared to the defocused image. As you can see on the diffused image, it looks like a blobby star, like you've got it defocused, but that's not quite the whole picture. On a typical defocused image, it maintains its point spread function. It's a Gaussian shape. And the main reason you want to diffuse the image or defocus it is to be able to collect more starlight over more sensors to get your statistics up much higher. You want to collect as many photons as you can to minimize the shot noise. So that's the first thing that the diffuser does for us, is it helps to maximize the signal to noise ratio in terms of shot noise. We discovered a couple other features that the diffuser provides that was detailed in the original paper also. So here's the difference in the point spread function for the 2 types of imaging. You can see that the diffused image, because of the engineered diffuser, provides this top hat shaped point spread function, where the standard defocus images is a standard Gaussian shape. And there's a couple of ramifications for that. One is that the defocused image does not mitigate the scintillation of the sky in the sample scintillation or in the long-term scintillation, where the diffused image does. Here's a photograph of what the diffuser looks like, and it's installed as a standard filter in a filter wheel on our system. Here's a 3D view of the shape, the diffuser. And you can see again, it's got that top hat shape, and it's kind of an interesting, I like that, the way the stars look in these images. It's kind of cool.
1 minute left.
So the first light curve we did at the MSRO was in January of 2018 with the defocus method, and we observed HAT P30 WASP 51b, and our precision was around 8 millimag. for this observation. And you can see where the modeling of the exoplanet was fairly good. The measured geometry was what we modeled based on our data in the catalog, so it was fairly good. In November of 2018, we observed exoplanet HET P16b with the diffuser, and the precision was much better. Basically, the shot noise precision was down to around 1 millimag RMS, and the total precision for scintillation plus shot noise was about 2.7 millimag. So we've improved our precision by a factor of about 3 or 4 with these observations with the diffuser.
Please wrap up your talk.
Here's the, this is the modeling results we had, and they match pretty well with the catalog value. And we're working with the test follow-up working group, the Seeing Limited group, to provide our observations. So that's it.
Great, thank you for your talk. Questions from the audience? I have a question. So because you're diffusing the star over more pixels, does that mean that you are less sensitive to the dimmer stars? Basically, you have a different magnitude limit versus the diffusion method?
Yeah, so since you are spraying a star, you're going to have a magnitude limit. And the other things with that is that you may have some background stars similar to the test mission, such a large pixel. They've got pixels that are have multiple stars in them. You have that issue also where you have some background stars that you have to clear or take into account. The other thing that the diffuser does for you is it mitigates the seeing, like I said, but it also mitigates tracking errors for small telescope systems and makes it inexpensive for amateurs to do this work. It really gives you and provides you more opportunity because it also works very well in marginal seeing conditions, and also if you don't have the perfect transparent skies, it helps you have more opportunities to observe exoplanets.
What kind of cost is the diffuser then? If it's going to be for small observatories, it's got to be affordable, right?
Yes, it's similar to other photometric filters. It's available from RPC Photonics. It's about $300. It's a 1-inch filter that you have to install yourself into a filter holder, a 1 1/4-inch filter holder.
Can you use it with other filters, or do you need to just do like white light? How does that?
If you stack your filter wheels and you have multi-band filters along with the diffuser, they do have to be stacked, and there's a distance requirement to be able to spread the light, and the details of that are in my paper.
All right, great. Thank you for your talk.
All right, thank you.
All right, next up, one question from a comment from David Charity. Thank you for the nice talk. The diffuser can work best if it diffuses only the target, not the background star, but that may be too specialized or expensive for the citizen scientists. Again, thank you. Okay. All right, so next up, we have Jennifer Burt from Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Okay,
so
I'm
you should be able to
share my screen. Okay, and then okay, does that come through for folks?
We're getting the presenter view.
Oh, that's not quite what I want.
Yeah, can you switch displays? Or
That is an excellent question.
In the upper left-hand corner, once you launch your presentation, it should give you the option to swap displays.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so let me try that again. Share. And then I can start. Oh, swap displays. Hey.
that looks good.
That better? Okay.
All right, take it away.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Jennifer Burt, and I'm presenting today on behalf of a whole consortium of folks who have been working for the last year or so thinking about ways to move the radial velocity field forwards in support of future direct imaging missions. Okay, there we go. So advances in RV precision have leveled off at roughly the 1 meter per second level as of last year or so. And that's roughly due to a combination of both instrument systematics, often being at about the 1 meter per second level, and stellar variability being at the 1 meter per second or above level. And combined, that makes it really challenging to kind of get below that threshold. And that's a problem because Earth analogs around sun-like stars exhibit RV semi-amplitudes of about 9 centimeters per second, so an order of magnitude below what we're currently able to achieve. Now, that might be changing in the near future as new instruments like Espresso, Express, and Newit are coming online and starting to achieve instrument precisions at more of the 30 to 50 centimeter per second level, but we need to really wait and see how that percolates forward. But in the meantime, the National Academy of Sciences ESS report suggested that we need to really improve our ability to do RV science because it's crucial both for better understanding the planets and for correctly interpreting atmospheric information we get from them, either via transmission spectroscopy or future direct imaging missions. And so they recommended that NASA and NSF should establish a strategic initiative in extremely precise radial velocities, or EPRVs, to try and develop methods and facilities to measure Earth analogs around sun-like stars in the future. And so in response, the NASA and NSF working group was formed, and our objective is described here, but the important part is that we were to deliver a report that includes a recommendation for the most promising ground-based programs and accompanying research efforts necessary to achieve this goal of measuring temperate terrestrial planet masses for planets orbiting stars that are amenable to both RVs and future direct imaging by mission concepts like HABEX, LUVOIR, or Starshade Rendezvous. And you can read more about this on the website that I've listed here. So in order to measure the masses of those kinds of planets, which again have an RV semi-amplitude of about 10 centimeters per second, we need to be achieving single measurement precision of about 10 centimeters per second. So that's an order of magnitude better than what we're achieving right now, or at least in the years leading up to now, and still a factor of 3 to 5 better than what we think these new RV instruments coming online are going to achieve. But if you can do that, then if you take 250 measurements over many years, then you can get down to a 10 sigma measurement on an Earth analog. So that gets you to a systemic accuracy of a few centimeters per second. So to address this challenge, we set up a working group of 40 world experts. We had biweekly telecons and split folks into 8 subgroups addressing a whole variety of challenges that we think need to be solved in order for this kind of science to be feasible. We had a variety of multi-day workshops and used the Kepner-Trigo method to develop and rate potential solutions. We started by devising a preliminary target list that was compiled from the LUVOIR, HABEX, and Starshade lists, and then down selected to stars that are amenable to precision RV work. So that means sun-like stars, effective temperatures less than about 6,200, that are slow rotators, have V-Sini less than about 5 kilometers per second, and are on at least 2 of these mission study lists. And you can see the stars here shown as open circles are pretty well spread across right ascension and declination, so they cover the sky pretty evenly. We then investigated a variety of observing approaches, and this involved designing 8 different architectures, as we called them, that included details on everything from the aperture and location of the telescopes to the bandpass, resolution, and throughput of the instruments, what amount of telescope allocation you have, how you want to observe the stars, etc. So these were all detailed by each one had a specific person leading that architecture. And then we did
1 minute left.
Huh? Oh, sorry. Okay. And then we did a 10-year survey simulation for each approach, where we ran a decade of observations and then took the resulting RV data and said, if there were an Earth analog around each star, and if we were able to completely remove the star's variability from the RV data, then how significant would our detection of that Earth analog be based on the simulated data? And we find that for most of the architectures, that for most of the stars, we can actually detect the Earth analog at a 10 sigma or better level, which is what we were aiming for. But that assumption that we can magically remove all of the stellar variability is a big one, and it is definitely not true right now. And so we've also spent a lot of time thinking about better ways to characterize the stellar variability, which evolves on a whole variety of timescales. And so we've put together a recommendation of both observational and analysis techniques that should be applied over the next 5 to 10 years to try and improve our ability to really mitigate stellar activity. We thought about ways to improve data reduction and analysis that is often applied to RV data products.
Please wrap
And
up.
also new instrument technologies that should be investigated as ways to improve the instrumental systematic side of the uncertainty that goes into RV measurements. And so the current status, our oral report, which was delivered at the end of March, was very well received by the Exoplanet Exploration Program Office. And the slides presented to NASA HQ and NSF are available for community to review at the website below. NASA HQ acknowledged and appreciated the community effort and all the time put in, and our recommendations are now under consideration. We are, at the moment, XF is including these kinds of recommendations into the budget planning for fiscal year 2021, but there is no guarantee that this will actually happen yet. We're waiting to hear back from headquarters once they finish their budget planning for the next cycle to see if this was actually approved, but we're hopeful at the moment. The final written report is under construction. We're polishing it up and we expect it to be completed in the next few weeks, at which point it will also be posted to the website below and disseminated via the Exopag Announce email listserv. And so if you either go to the website or sign up for that email list, you should get a copy. And if you have any other questions, you should head to that website and or contact the XF office, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay, and so with that, that's a whirlwind tour of what we did, but I'm more than happy to take questions or try and answer any inquiries you might have. And I'll say thank you.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. We have a couple questions from Francisco Mendez. What methods are you considering to measure the stellar activity variability and subtract it from the RV measurements?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work that's gone into this, and I did not lead this part of the study, but I know that a couple of areas we're looking at are both how to make better use of extremely precise data, RV data from the sun. So taking the solar data that's from the HARPS and HARPS North telescopes, and that will be coming from NUID and Express, and using that to get a better handle on the very short timescale stellar variability types that exist, using very high resolution and very high cadence data to study those. And then we're also trying to better understand the observing cadence needed on not the sun, but normal stellar targets to try and mitigate this. And so there are thoughts of doing studies where we observe stars for long swaths of the night. You could also do this with solar data, and then say, okay, if we bin this data down or pretend that we have subsampled it, is it enough to look at the star once per night? Do we need to look at the star 3 times per night or 5 times per night? What is necessary to truly treat these stellar variability changes as a signal that we can characterize and then try to remove, as opposed to a noise source that in the past we've just tried to bin over.
Great. Next question is from Ward Howard. How would you ideally remove stellar flares and spot evolution to increase RV precision?
Ooh. So I think with the stellar flares, the majority of the stars that we're targeting at the moment are relatively quiet in terms of flares. There aren't a lot of M dwarfs on this list, which are the more frequent flarers, because we're focusing on solar analogs. I don't know what the right way to remove the flares that do occur in sun-like stars is, to be honest. For spot evolution, that's again the idea of making sure that we have enough data once a night, multiple times a night, to map out those rotational signals. It also means that we're going to be doing a lot of side-by-side auxiliary observations, whether that's photometry or additional types of monitoring, so that we can get a better handle on what the star is doing photometrically, so we can map those star spots and get a better sense of the star's rotation period, or if there's differential rotation and things like that. That can then hopefully be folded into the analysis of how we're handling the modeling of the data once it's been reduced.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, for your talk. So at this point, we actually have a gap in our schedule. And so I'm going to open the floor at this time to any questions for any of the speakers who have gone so far. And at time zone change. What are we looking at? 12:10. We will start the last 2 talks of this session. But at this point, if anybody has questions for any of the speakers, you can go ahead and type them into the Q&A. You can take this opportunity to take a break, but I will be here monitoring and moderating the discussion. All right, it is 12:10 Eastern Time. So let's resume our session. Our next speaker is Zoe DeBurs from University of Texas at Austin. And she will be talking about removing stellar activity from RVs using artificial intelligence.
Awesome. So yes, hi, my name is Zoe DeBurs. I'm a rising senior at the University of Texas at Austin. And today I'll be talking about my research in removing stellar activity signals from radial velocities using artificial intelligence, with the ultimate goal of increasing our sensitivity to smaller and smaller planets. So as a reminder, the radial velocity method, or in the radial velocity method, the average spectrum of the star is blue shifted or red shifted as the star moves away from us or towards us. And this is due to the gravitational pull of the planet. This average line spectrum is sometimes also referred to as a cross correlation function, or a CCF. And if we use super sensitive spectrographs, these shifts can be measured and used to infer details of a planet's mass and orbit. However, planets are not the only thing that can result in changes of the cross-correlation function, specifically sunspots that we can see in these animations, these artist conceptions, which are darker spots with strong magnetic fields on the sun's surface, can also change the line shape of the cross-correlation function. And this form of stellar activity in the form of spots or plages can cause RV signals of about 5 meters per second, whereas smaller planets that might be Earth masses produce signals of about 10 centimeters per second. And so if we want to be able to detect smaller and smaller planets, we have to characterize and effectively remove stellar activity signals to be able to see these smaller planets. So our solution to this problem is to train a convolutional neural network to regress out stellar activity. So neural networks are considered state-of-the-art for shape recognition, and neural networks are sets of nodes that are loosely modeled after the structure of the brain and can be trained to recognize patterns. So in our specific case, we are feeding hundreds and hundreds of these cross-correlation functions, or these average line spectra, into an input layer of the neural network. And then these activated neurons are learning to extract specific features from the shape of the spectra, such that we can ultimately characterize the line shape and predict what the stellar activity signal is based on that line shape. And we do this by feeding it hundreds and hundreds of these cross-correlation functions and getting better and better at predicting that stellar activity signal. So, but to be able to do this, we need a training set. And so we have a training set of observations from the HARPS North Solar Telescope, which is a high precision spectrograph. And this training set consists of 731 different configurations of stellar activity signals from our sun, which range from -3 to 5 meters per second. Instead of just feeding it the cross-correlation function, we first subtract the mean cross-correlation function, which is what you're seeing here, and they're color-coded based on how red-shifted or blue-shifted the RV signal is from stellar activity. So how well does this actually do when you feed these into a neural network and ask it to predict what is the activity signal, or what is the radial velocity due to stellar activity? So here we see that we have the HARPS North stellar activity signal on the x-axis and the model predicted stellar activity signal on the y-axis. And then here are the predictions by the neural network. So we started off with a raw scatter of about 1.37 meters per second. And by regressing out stellar activity using our neural network, we reduced this to about 0.77 meters per second. So
1 minute left.
Thank you. To give you kind of an intuitive sense of what that would actually mean for observers, this would mean that you would be able to go from detecting a gas giant that is about roughly 15 times as massive as the Earth, to being sensitive to a large rocky planet that is roughly 8.7 times the mass of the Earth. So this is paving the way to detecting smaller and smaller planets, even though we still have a long way to go to reaching 1 Earth masses. But overall, we see that we've successfully removed noise from stellar activity on real data. So in conclusion, we found that stellar activity from spots and plages limits measurement precision. We found that our convolutional neural network can successfully remove stellar activity signals, and our future directions are to further optimize our convolutional neural networks hyperparameters and architecture so that we can remove even more stellar activity and drastically improve our ability to detect smaller and smaller planets, paving the way towards being able to detect Earth mass, habitable exoplanets using the RV method. I would like to thank my advisors, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thanks so much for your talk. We have a question from Andrew Cooperus. Great talk. Is it possible that a different neural net might be needed to be used for different stellar types? Meaning, would the type or scale of the effects change in something like M dwarfs and require different training data and a different neural net?
Yes, that's a great question. So a big component of your ability to actually predict the stellar activity signals would be based on the training set, kind of like the question asks. So if you would only have training data from, for example, sun-like stars, and you would ask it to predict the stellar activity signal from much more active stars, it would probably do a pretty bad job just because it hasn't seen spectra that look similar to that. So it is definitely really important that your training data is similar to what you're actually trying to predict, for sure. Yes.
Okay, from Francisco Mendez, what spectral lines or activity indicators did you use to train your neural network? Great talk, by the way.
Yeah, so we actually didn't use specific spectral line, or we're using a cross-correlation function that's looking at all of the cross-correlation across all of the spectral lines. And so we're not using specific activity indicators or a specific line. It's using at the average, it's looking at the average spectrum across all wavelengths, or across all wavelengths that HARPS North looks at.
Question from Michelle Silverstein. Wow, really cool stuff. Is there a tool available to apply this method?
As of right now, we haven't put our code onto GitHub, but we're working on a paper, and I think that we will probably make it publicly accessible, yes. So not yet, but.
So I have a question. So if, you mentioned looking at different spectral types, would you be looking more at a training set based on actual data, or could you also just use models?
Yes, so that's a good question. So we actually, before we started working with HARPS North Solar data, we had used another model developed by Xavier Demusque, which is called SOAP 2.0, which can model specifically solar-like stars. And you can input like what kind of like spot configurations or plage configurations would you like, and then it will output one of these average line spectra. And so we did some training on simulated data, which I think I actually included some extra slides that have the results of that. But what you can see is that it also does really well on simulated data. But I think that you obviously, like in real data, you're going to have some differences between the two. So it is still really important, if you can, to train on real data, because it might not necessarily transfer as well if you only go on physically motivated models and don't necessarily have real data and some of the extra noise that can come from the instrument and things like that. But yes, it's good to kind of do both, for sure. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. All right, our last talk of the session is from Victor Ramirez Delgado from the University of Delaware.
Yes, let me share my screen. All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Victor Ramirez Delgado from the University of Delaware. And it's my pleasure to present to you my project about analyzing velocity variations for Gamma Draconic star. To start, Gamma Dra is a star located in the constellation of Draco. It is a red giant star with a mass of almost twice our Sun. And it was of my interest to study this star because it was previously reported that it had a planet orbiting around it with a mass of around 10 times the mass of Jupiter. Now, after further investigation, it was very likely and very possible that those signals were false positive caused by stellar activity. So the purpose of my project was to develop a mathematical model that would describe the RV variations that are observed for this star. So the first thing was to start looking at the radial velocity data from 4 different telescopes and that are measurements for over more than 10 years, which are shown in the first graph. Then the second thing was to look at the periodicity observing the RV, which by comparing the periodogram, we can see that the highest peaks appear to be between like around 600 days to 800 days. And then I also increased the error in the radial velocity when working on my first model. And I did this by basing myself on previous work of how the jitter affects the RV measurements and adds extra error to it. Moving on, I developed 2 different models, both quasi-periodic kernels, with different numbers of parameters. The first model, as you can see here, has 4 different parameters. The first one, the amplitude. The second one represents the lifetime of a spot. The gamma, the smoothness of the oscillations, and the P, the period observed. For the second model, I added 2 extra parameters to another periodic motion, so the sine square, that is going to have a different smoothness and in a different period. The next step was to develop or to optimize these 2 models by using 2 different tools. The first one was a machine learning algorithm called a Gaussian process regressor that fits a model to the covariance matrix of the dataset instead of feeding a model directly to the data. The second one is called EMC. It's a Markov chain Monte Carlo method assembly sampler that I use to explore the parameter space of each of the parameters and verify that the values were significant and reasonable. And this graph represents an example of how the data looks like when it's plotted with a model created by the Gaussian regressor. These corner plots that you see here are the results of the assembly sampler. For the first model, I ended up making the gamma a fixed value because it gave the best optimized results. While from the second model, I let the 6 parameter values to completely change, and that's why there's 6 parameters in the corner plots, where these circles and the dark circles represent the covariance between each parameter. Then also, this table includes what were the values that were optimized, or what were the values that the optimizer find after running the regression. And in these results, in this graph, you can see how those original data looks like when it's plotted against the 2 different models. For the top graph, it's plotted with a single sample of the optimized parameters, while from the bottom graph, I use 500 random samples and plot them all together. Then I proceeded to do 2 statistical tests to evaluate the performance of each of the models. The first one was a chi-square test, which basically matches or observes how well does a model matches the data points. And the second one was a Bayesian information criterion that evaluates 2 models and compare and basically decides if it makes sense to make a more complex model with a higher number of parameters.
1 minute left.
And after running the 2 tests, the normal distribution supported the second model because the chi-square test was closer to the value of 1, and because the Bayesian information criterion was lower than for the first model. In conclusion, I think like this project has the potential of using how these algorithms can be a method to differentiate 2 measurements of a planet from false positive caused by cell variability, as mentioned before, caused by magnetic rotation, magnetic activity, oscillations, and granulation. Also, I think that with enough work and investigation on this type of models, it can give us further insight about how the variability of red giant operates, and hopefully it can be extended to different types of stars with the purpose of improving our planet detection methods. That is all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your talk. We have a question from Andrew Cooperis. Good talk. What kernel functional form did you use for the Gaussian process method?
For the Gaussian process method, I use these 2 kernels. So I did it in Python, where it has a package called George, where you can use these two kernels. So this is the square exponential with that this square exponential is multiplied by a sine square, by an exponential raised to a sine square.
So I have a question. So you looked at these two models, one where you had a fixed gamma and a model where you had an additional gamma, and they were both allowed to float. How do you check to make sure that you're not overfitting the model by the addition of these two parameters?
Right, that is a good question. So that is when the tests that I run come into play, especially the Bayesian information criterion, because how this test works is that if you have two models, it compares the amount of parameters that you have, and it basically punishes, like in some sort of way, it punishes your model if you have a higher number of parameters. So what we would expect is that if you're overfitting, then the highest, the model with the highest number of parameters will get a higher Bayesian information criterion based on how well it fits the data. Although by computing this test, it showed that the second model, even though it had 6 parameters compared to the first one, it was much better, and it did a better performance at fitting data, even though it had a higher number of parameters.
Any further questions from the audience? Anybody? All right, well, thank you for your talk, Victor. And I'd like to thank all the participants for attending this session. I want to thank all the speakers for giving excellent talks to kick off this AAS meeting. You all brought your A game. Thank you for staying on time. And with that, that concludes this session.